Hello, listeners. Real quick before we get started, there were some audio issues during this podcast that we apologize for. Around 39 minutes, you'll hear our interview guest kind of fall off on the audio. We believe it's Skype related, so we asked him to restate it at that point. We didn't want to edit any part of the conversation we had with him for content reasons. So that's what you'll hear at that point. This is Breaking Down Security, and I'm Brian Brake. Welcome back, listener. This is Brian and Mr. Betcher for Breaking Down Security.
Hello. How you doing?
Yeah, all right. So I want to get right on into our interview here. We are interviewing probably the highest level person we've ever interviewed, ever, at a company. Patrick Heim, it is?
Heim, yes.
Heim, who is the head of trust and security at Dropbox, of all places. I mean, we're hitting the big time, Mr. Betcher, this time. So welcome to the show, Mr. Patrick.
Hey, thank you guys for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
Right on. So one of the first questions I always ask people who've been on our podcast is maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your origin story, how you got to be where you're at in the world right now.
Okay, so my supervillain origin story.
Exactly, your origin story.
Goes back a long time. Actually, you know what? I when I was a kid, I didn't even know it, but I was kind of like a hacker. I was like in the old days, before the internet, in the good old days. Basically, in order to go to bulletin boards, we had to mess with a phone company, like phone phreaking and stuff, to get free long distance and horrible things like that. And it was just kind of something that came natural. But at that time, it really wasn't even a career option or anything like that, nor was it really a criminal option. It just didn't exist. It was more like kids goofing around. Mm-hmm. But eventually, I transitioned through. I went through school and eventually got a job in corporate IT in a large company. And now all of a sudden I kind of got sucked into the professional world of technology. Eventually made my way out to the West Coast, joined Ernst & Young, where it was like my first job where oh my God, I can hack and get paid for it, doing penetration testing, security assessments and things. Really in the late 90s during the first .com boom that we had here on the West Coast, which was a super exciting time to be out here, to really learn about all of these different evolving business models and technology platforms. So just kind of sucked that all up and kept going on security. Eventually rotated through two different security startup companies. One of them was called Encircle now it's called Encircle. It used to be called Everworld. And as well as another security startup company that was a subsidiary of Applied Signal Technologies. Eventually then moved into the CISO role for a large healthcare company called McKesson Corporation that's based out of San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And after 6 years there as the CISO, really just kind of trying to figure out what the hell does the CISO do and what am I going to do here, kind of grew out of that and moved over to Kaiser Permanente, another healthcare organization. Mm-hmm. I became the CISO. And after a while there, I got a call from Benioff over at Salesforce, and it's like, hey, we're kind of looking for this chief trust officer role. And I had the opportunity of moving over back into the tech industry, really, which has been an awesome ride. So that was diving right into the cloud business, building up the trust function at Salesforce over X number of years, until the opportunity came along. It's like, hey, Dropbox is really at an awesome moment right now. The growth in their enterprise business is phenomenal, and they were kind of at the same stage that Salesforce was at much earlier on. So it's this is an amazing opportunity for me to join a company that I really believe in and really help shape a trust and security program that helps their growth in terms of accelerating into the enterprise space. So I joined Dropbox about a year ago or so.
Okay. So your job description is the head of trust and security. Maybe you could explain what that is? Is it like a glorified CISO with additional duties as assigned, or are you doing product outreach and that kind of thing?
It's like all of the above. And in a way, trust is, there are more chief trust officers in trust and security. It's kind of a newish term out there. And I think it started probably with Salesforce, and some other companies have copied it now. Mm-hmm. We're definitely not unique in that title, but the whole concept of trust realizes that in a cloud business, there is much more than just the element of security. At the end of the day, you're putting your trust and faith in the cloud provider that they're going to do everything right, whether it's data protection, data availability, compliance, based on kind of the constraints of what they actually have to do, et cetera. So there's a much more intimate relationship between the customer and the cloud provider than if it were like a packaged software business, or if I'm just focused on securing our business. So clearly there's that element of being inward facing and making sure that we do everything right, have a really solid security program, top-notch security engineers, we're executing against that. But there's also kind of an outward facing element where it's like, okay, what do our customers really want or need? What's the strategy for building customer trust to really, as an element of supporting the business growth?
Okay.
So how, as a cloud provider, how do you provide additional security to clients? I mean, say I'm in the cloud and I get a crypto event. Can you alert me that I have some sort of malware infection?
So are we talking generally cloud or more specifically like Dropbox? So obviously, so if there's like a piece of malware that's running on your system, most of the time we're just going to be blind to it. I mean, that's a limitation of the model. Our desktop agent isn't going to be doing the same job as your antivirus agent or some kind of anti-malware protection. But obviously, if we see, for example, we have a pretty extensive fraud and abuse team. If we see patterns where all of a sudden, hey, something strange is happening, there's a binary that's being downloaded by thousands from a single account, or there's a pattern of behavior where a bunch of accounts are being created purposely for the distribution of binaries. We're looking for all of that. We have a bunch of automated tools and thresholds and whatnot, and we definitely want to make sure that we protect our customers and basically the entire world, or our users in the world, from kind of abuse. We frankly don't want Dropbox to be a platform that encourages abuse by various attackers out there. So we do take steps to basically detect and block and remediate when we see malware type activity, when we have visibility into it. That being said, we also want to be super careful about how balancing that against privacy. So, when you set up a Dropbox account, our terms of service are really clear. It's like we don't monetize based on analyzing your data, your connections. We don't sell that information to anybody, and it's basically your private box. So it's sometimes tough striking that balance around how comprehensive do we want to be, because sometimes perfect security requires you to be nosy.
Yeah. So you were one of the first applications that I used back in the day that required two-factor auth. That must have been a massive undertaking to push out and to enable for everybody. Could you maybe speak a little bit about that and how that got decided?
We're not forcing two-factor auth, but what's really important to understand is maybe we peel it back to basically say what is actually causing risk, what's causing loss. So if I'm a very practical person, I look in terms of, okay, what's causing problems? Let's tackle that. And when I look at the cloud space from the perspective of Dropbox, we see a significant number of incidents that, when you peel it back, go back to credential theft and credential reuse. In other words, the common problem that we see, it's almost universal, and I always like to get on a soapbox about this, is people reuse the same password across multiple websites. It's not even about reusing weak passwords. Somebody else gets popped out there, the hashes get stolen, they get cracked. Now all of a sudden we see this password testing activity that's going on, and accounts being taken over by pretty industrial strength bad guys that have really good automation tools and cloaking tools available to them. And that's what actually causes harm to our customers when that happens, to our users. So when we focus on something like two-factor authentication, we're being very practical and basically saying that's causing a pain. We're going to try to fix that. Mm-hmm. So we rolled out both SMS-based two-factor authentication plus one-time token codes. And then more recently, I think we're one of the, I think the only cloud after Google to add what's called again, U2F support, kind of like YubiKey and some of the companies that comply with the U2F standard, which has been incredibly phenomenal. The only thing I wish is every one of your listeners, if they can pick up on this, is like, please turn on 2FA and encourage everybody in the world to turn on 2FA. When we look at the stats around how effective two-factor authentication is, and it doesn't matter which one you choose, but we really don't see that there's any real data that people who've turned on 2FA have had any kind of account takeover or account compromise that's been successful.
Very nice. Now you mentioned business risk a little earlier. What do you say, or how do you try to allay the fears of companies that are not embracing the cloud? Is it difficult to try to get people to use cloud-based services if they've been stuck at a traditional data center forever? I mean, something that just works. Why would they want to go to the cloud? What makes it better than a regular data center?
I mean, a lot of it goes back to kind of the leadership of those companies, to be quite honest. And some of them are going to be more difficult to convince than others. But I sit across from CIOs and I say, okay, like peel it back and tell me what your pain points are. But wait, before you do that, let me anticipate some of those for you. Okay, and it's like you as the CISO or CIO or CISO, basically, you're held accountable for driving innovation and productivity and agility in your business. And at the same time, you have pressure to basically reduce your OPEX spend and your CAPEX spend. And on top of that, basically, you're being given the burden of making sure that everything is perfectly secure, because there's a heck of a lot of pressure around there around security. And I can almost guarantee you that the economics that you're constrained by don't make any sense whatsoever. So you're probably in a large company still struggling with the basics like patch management and basic vulnerability management, because it's so much overhead when it's basically hidden cost onto your infrastructure and onto your applications. And the chances are really good that when your budgets are set to reduce kind of like OPEX costs and stuff like that, that's never factored in. So most CISOs in companies that are of any decent size are unfortunately kind of playing this losing game, where the pressure that they're being placed under makes it pretty impossible then to pay attention to every detail of security. And I try to get them to look at their own operations. And most of the time when I kind of lead in with this, they kind of nod their heads and say, yeah, that's the reality we're living under. So this is why cloud computing is so compelling, because there is a significant chunk of the security stack that you would have to, have engineers for and buy a bunch of products, integrate and manage, that kind of goes away when you go to the cloud. And at the same time, kind of cloud providers like us, we have phenomenal leverage on the engineers that we get, because everything we have is extremely uniform. It's highly automated. And the quality of the engineers we can attract and basically recruit to operate or to basically come to Dropbox here, just like world class. I mean, we've got PhDs in the security team doing amazing, incredible things that if you're the average CIO, you wouldn't have a chance of recruiting those, especially into maybe a not super interesting industry like say, for example, manufacturing. So at the end of the day, it's like whatever industry you're in, you're going to have the same bad guys knocking at your doors, because the attackers are highly scalable in terms of what they can do. But the defensive side isn't going to scale for you, both because of economic realities that in the traditional data center environment, you're not going to be able to get that funding to do everything perfect all the time, and because you're not going to be able to get access to the talent. The talent in the security industry just hasn't scaled. So I guess putting it all together, I think I actually view as cloud is moving or migrating to cloud as a whole is actually a really viable risk management strategy. And I would say it's actually evidence that if you look across the big breaches that are happening, it's like it's not that cloud companies are getting breached in a big way. That's actually super rare to see like a really sophisticated technical breach or something. Most of the times it's large environments where they've been unable to basically focus on the basics, such as patch management and whatnot, that result in breaches. And it's the traditional data centers that are getting hacked. So
very nice.
So on accepting security technology, I mean, is the lack of acceptance of new things like cloud and other security tools, how big of a risk is that for certain companies? I mean, the way I see it is a lot of times in the organizations that I've been in, our biggest risk is the pushback that we get for not adopting certain things like vulnerability management.
Mm-hmm. I think there is a huge risk if you aren't up there adopting. And again, this goes back to the leadership of these companies. Do they get it or not? And the companies that believe they can manage it within their own four walls and buy a bunch of products, they just aren't getting this. It's just not going to scale. It's not going to work for them. And I mean, you can logically try to convince them. You can look at the data that shows transitioning to cloud is frankly one of the few things that actually makes sense as a risk management strategy. But you're absolutely right that if they don't embrace that, if they don't actually do it, they're probably going to be punished. And the punishment is they're going to get have some kind of breach or a hack or something else that further adds to the data pool that basically shows that managing it in-house doesn't work. Conversely, though, one of the interesting things that I've seen as a trend in Dropbox is that I've seen a number of cases where rather than us, like selling to the CIO, Dropbox Business or Dropbox Enterprise, we actually have CISOs coming to us and are basically saying, hey, it's like I see that I have this, have a huge degree of utilization of cloud services within my company. My employees have already adopted, they're using Dropbox. And I really have a couple of options here. I can either ignore that it's happening, which no security officer is going to do, or they can try to block it all, which is also, I think, in most business environments is untenable to nowadays basically block popular services. Or the third alternative is it's like my employees already love this stuff and they're getting a huge amount of value out of it. So I'm going to lead the charge in terms of driving a formalized adoption and actually buy it for the company and license it so that I can get some visibility and control into it, like roll up the logs, information, manage access control, authentication, all that kind of good jazz. So it's kind of interesting. We're seeing more and more of this where security leaders are looking at cloud adoption, especially kind of the more traditional consumer cloud products, in terms of being the ones that say, I want to be able to embrace it and manage it versus try to block it or be anti-progress.
Mm-hmm.
It's a cool trend.
Yeah. So you were mentioning basically using shadow IT for instance. Using your own technology inside the enterprise and allowing people to connect to that with various devices. You're right. You can't policy that away. You can't force people to use traditional methods. If they're already using Dropbox, why would you want them to use a file server at their office? It's not easy to get to. Whereas something like Dropbox or one of your other competitors would be easier to use, and they're already well versed in using that. So that makes perfect sense. And the only other thing you've got to do is you've got to make sure that they are securing that your implementation is secure and that the people who are using those, while they're comfortable with the interface and with the methods, that they're doing it in a secure manner.
Yeah. What's actually funny is you mentioned shadow IT, and I was speaking at a conference recently. I kind of came up with this tagline. It's like shadow IT is the new IT. And then when I looked into it, basically, there's actually a Gartner model called bimodal IT where they look at mode 1 and mode 2 technology. But in summary, basically, mode 1 is the traditional tech you need to have your business running. It's like you don't want to mess up the factory. That requires a lot of diligence and discipline, et cetera. And then mode 2 IT is the stuff that makes your employees agile and productive, where you can have the room to experiment more. And if you look at a tool like Dropbox or like Evernote or many of these things, those are mode 2 IT products. These are the types of things that even if they go horribly wrong from a value perspective, they're not going to hurt your business too much. So, but when you look at which ones should you focus on, it's like the concept here is basically just look at what your employees are already using, leverage them as the resource to determine what are the agility tools, what are the innovation tools, rather than taking a top-down approach where IT leaders need to, it's like, let's go to Gartner and have them tell us. It's the opposite approach, which is, hey, let's just look at what our employees are actually using and figure out how we convert those apps that they're already using into something that we can actually manage the risk on, plus allow them to continue driving value out of.
Very cool. So one of the other things I was thinking of when we were doing this talk was moving, a company that has to deal with a lot of compliance and regulatory issues. It really makes sense for them to move things more cloud-based because those cloud organizations are already, SOC compliant. They're already PCI compliant. They're already FedRAMP compliant if you're having to deal with the government space. They're already having to do that, so it makes it a lot easier when audit time comes up for their own company. They can say, well, where you put all your stuff? Well, it's in an AWS cluster. It's in an Azure cluster. Okay, well, let's see their SOC 2. Boom, here's the SOC 2.
Yep.
We don't have to deal with all the additional overhead of compliance requirements.
And you're absolutely right. And I mean, this is kind of frankly part of my strategy as well here. We have ISO 27001, we have SOC 1, 2, and 3. We have a bunch of these things. And the reason is basically it's like, hey, we want you to come to Dropbox and feel good about putting your data in Dropbox without having to invest massive resources in terms of doing the technical assessment or without having to do it yourself, of course. And these certifications are amazingly valuable for a large number of customers in really getting that level of comfort that we're going to be a great partner for them. It's building that trust, and it's building it through independent verification. I mean, obviously, we're not self-certifying. These are auditors that are coming in and actually testing us against all these assertions.
So do you hire like ex-auditors so that you know exactly where the industry is heading, or do you just have a real close relationship? I know you said you were working with Ernst & Young at one time, so you must still have a good working relationship with them, and they must come in on the reg to discuss these kinds of things?
Oh yeah, no, Ernst & Young is kind of the prime auditor that we use for most of our internal controls testing. So yeah, I mean, they're obviously a huge global organization that carry a huge amount of credibility. So when they issue our SOC reports, for example, it's not like Joe's neighborhood audit shop giving an opinion. It's Ernst & Young. They've done a really solid job in terms of assessing us and testing us against the claims that we have around security and compliance.
Very cool. So somebody in your position and people who are in large cloud organizations, they help drive the industry. Do you when you must sit on obviously some boards that are steering committees for various things? How do you make sure that upcoming, like say PCI 3.2 comes out because 3.1 is lacking something? How do you make sure that whatever it is that you're proposing in upcoming standards makes sense and keeps from just totally causing issues with the industry at large?
Yeah, so I'm not going to talk about PCI. PCI
Sure.
is probably a bad example because we're that's not one of the things. You're not going to put credit cards into Dropbox. We're not going to advertise ourselves for the use of that.
Yeah.
But if you look at something like CSA, Cloud Security Alliance, they're developing standards around cloud controls. So we're absolutely involved with them, and there are other bodies as well. Plus, we have a kind of regulatory affairs team, more on the legal side of things, that's trying to achieve similar objectives, really making sure that as kind of policymakers around the world look at security and compliance requirements, that they aren't that they're aligned with the business interests and with the realities of cloud providers.
Okay. So, and of course, anything that you're working with in the Cloud Security Alliance has to make sense because it's going to affect a lot of people, not just organizations that are on the board. Anybody with any kind of private, or something other than an Amazon or an Azure or a Google or a Dropbox, who has probably their own pretty massive data centers themselves. Do you worry about how those things will affect other people, or are you just trying to ensure that I don't know, your bubble is good and that
I mean, we want to advance the state of cloud as a whole, and you may have noticed, like when I talk, especially in the abstract earlier, I'm not saying Dropbox. I'm saying cloud.
Sure.
I'm a huge believer. I'm part of the cloud industry, and I want to see it succeed because I honestly, in my heart of hearts, believe that is one of the best risk management strategies that most companies can take, which is move stuff to the cloud. So I want to see the entire industry succeed together. And especially when I put my hat on, if I think about the needs of a small to mid-sized business nowadays, they again, if I look at the adversaries, they don't have a chance nowadays that they try to do things in-house. They have to move to cloud. So we as cloud providers bear a huge burden on doing things right and doing it much, much better than most organizations can.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool.
Now, you've seen organizations move to the cloud and they've had issues or failures. I mean, what are some of the heavy hitting trouble that you've seen?
I think one of the challenges that organizations have when they adopt cloud computing is that they don't go through the explicit definition of security accountabilities, and they don't draw that line explicitly between what's the role of the provider, of the cloud provider, versus what do I still have to do. And there is clearly a shift in terms of the roles and responsibilities of the security team within an organization. So, for example, let's assume some Dropbox. It's like you don't have accountability for network security and firewalls and elements of infrastructure monitoring and detection. Those are all clearly ours. But then if you look at whose job is it to monitor that insiders don't abuse it, or that you're able to detect breaches based on patterns of usage, login activity and things like that. We couldn't, for example, unless we see like broad sweeping actors across multiple customers where we see patterns, we really don't know if all of a sudden when you access that new confidential file or send it somewhere and share it with somebody else, whether that's an indicator of a breach or normal business activity. So that's a classic case where customers have the accountability of ingesting things like the log files that we can provide and running into their own SIEM environment. Or with regards to configuration, I think one of the things we've also seen as a mistake is that because the adoption of cloud has, in many cases, started with a department or somebody with a credit card basically buying it, they don't configure it necessarily with the required settings. And let's talk about like 2FA. Still very low penetration of individuals and companies that actually turn on 2FA, or even better, if you're a business, like integrating it using SAML with your existing on-premise authentication systems. Incredibly powerful tools, but unless that's done above board and with the basically the enterprise security team there to help guide you on how to integrate this, you're going to have cloud implementations that from a customer side have relatively weak security, not necessarily from the provider side.
And let's talk about cost as well. I've never worked for a company that moves stuff to the cloud, and I don't know exactly the cost model of different cloud providers, but it it seems like that if you wanted to do things like virus scanning every week and vulnerability scanning every week, and also log all the things, that would be pretty pricey.
Well, so you need to understand, again, based on what does the cloud provider automatically do for you. So do you really want to do a vulnerability scan of Dropbox? You may be one of about 1 million people out there who's probing us all the time for security vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. And we're really good at like patching and fixing those types of things. And you're not going to find very much. So this is back to kind of retooling the expectations of what the security team on the customer side should be doing. Clearly, if they want to fire up a vulnerability scanner against us, they can. But I would argue that's kind of a waste of time and effort. Because we have good vulnerability management practices, they're audited, but feel free to do that. Yeah.
Cool. Well, if I have an application that's in the cloud and I want to vulnerability scan that,
an application
or hire a, yeah.
Not 100% sure, but I mean, it's like, are you talking about API integrated applications? Because I think we have like 300,000 or so apps that have API integration with Dropbox as a storage backend. So I'm not clear what you mean with like, because we're not a platform like Google App Engine or like what's it called again, like Amazon, where you can actually run your code on our platform.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, my company conversely is almost completely in the cloud, and it's an interesting concept because we do pretty much all the as a services. We have platform infrastructure and software as a service, and we find that we're often nickeled and dimed for every little bit that we do, to the point where at some point you have to go, well, how much money would we save if we didn't stay in the cloud, or if we were to move some non-essential operations to, say, a rack of servers in Dallas, Texas or something.
I can't speak to like the other cloud providers and their pricing model, but for us, we kind of really strive for simplicity. And I think that even at the macro level of cloud in general, you do have the benefit that the costs are predictable. They're operating expense, they're predictable. It's not massive capital expenses and hidden maintenance cost, et cetera. But from our perspective, we basically have the free product. Well, that's not expensive. We have the pro product for individuals that really want additional capabilities, controls, storage. And then we have two tiers of business products. One is Dropbox Business, which is really for SMBs, and then Dropbox Enterprise, which is for large businesses that vary based on the features. But beyond that, there's no hidden pricing. There are no additional things that we basically charge our customers for, not that I'm aware of.
Cool. So I want to shift gears for a second here. We're at about 30 minutes. So I don't know how much time you've got with us here. So I wanted to get on some leadership, because you are a leader in your organization and in the industry at large. So I wanted to discuss a little bit about team building and how, as a leader, you help develop leaders. Do you do it through maybe you could give us some insight on how you do that, if you do it by mentoring, or if there's other methods that you do to help develop the leadership and the leaders in your organization.
God, leadership, what a broad topic.
I know.
Yeah.
As a mentor myself, which I kind of fell into, I did not realize I could be a mentor, but it's just something I fell into. I'd kind of like to get some insights on how you do mentorship, or if you do mentorship, and that kind of thing.
We do a fair amount of mentorship, and it frankly, a lot of it starts with basic management practices, which is, just talk to your people, understand what their career ambitions and goals are, and help support those. Have very frank discussions around what their strengths and weaknesses are, and really try to figure out how you can help them and develop them. Invest in their training. Make sure you give honest feedback. Make yourself accessible. I think if we go down the rabbit hole of leadership, there's a huge amount there, but quite frankly, it's like as I'm kind of getting old and grumpy here, I look back and it's amazing how many of the folks that have worked for me over time have moved on to CISO positions of their own or started companies and whatnot. So, in the grand scheme of things, security is pretty ephemeral, but the people that we've helped build careers for and the successes they had, that's one of the really awesome lasting benefits that I enjoy from this job.
Okay. So as somebody who you mentor, it sounds like you go beyond just the regular yearly evaluation or whatever. Is there a way to assess? Because like myself, I don't do a lot of manager stuff, but I'd like to, obviously move in that direction as my career track. Is there a way to self-assess yourself to know what type of manager you are, if you're going to be a good manager, and maybe ways of correcting that kind of thing?
I think so. Number one, I learned through trial and error. I used to be a crappy manager, and I used to.
Oh, wow.
I think a lot of us came out of kind of tech tracks. It was like we got into security. Mm-hmm. We had a technical specialization. At some point in time, we kind of outgrew doing it ourselves, and were given a team of people. Mm-hmm. We had how to manage, and then as the organizations grew, largest org I had was over 200 people.
Wow.
We have to really shift our thinking and figure out how do we lead and motivate. And we, at least in my case, it's a lot of trial and error based on mistakes.
Okay.
But in general advice in terms of assessing yourself, it's like just be self-aware of how you present yourself, how you engage. I think one of the most interesting steps that I had to take in my growth as a leader and as a manager was to recognize when I need to shut up and allow people to develop their expertise. So I had a specific technical focus, and then I had a team, and now it's like, okay, I have to actually suppress the inside. I have to suppress adding my own perspective on it, or adding my own deep technical. Here's what I think in depth. Basically, that can totally shut down the conversation. It's not my job anymore, and I need to be in a position that any of the guys who work for me technically should be much smarter than I am. But I had to turn that switch off in my brain basically and say that I need to create an environment where I'm helping guide people to the right answer. I'm helping develop them, but at the end of the day, technically, I need to be mostly irrelevant, but yet smart enough to be able to ask the right questions, to assess their performance, to make sure we're moving in the right direction. And that's really kind of a scary moment if you're developing as a manager and you're transitioning into somebody who's been doing things and who has built their career on actually having technical knowledge, into somebody now who's relying on others to develop that and saying that I'm not good.
So it sounds like you're more facilitating and guiding than just telling people what to do. You're, instead of hemming people into one space, you're just saying, okay, we need to get to point B. not necessarily care how you do it, but
Oh, well, it's like you want to monitor and guide, but I think one of the best pieces of advice I received from, I can't remember who it was, but it was a number of years ago, was the 70-20-10 rule, which is like if you're a leader, spend 70% of your time listening, spend 20% of your time asking questions, and only spend 10% of your time telling people what you think and what to do. And I actually kind of suck at that, but I keep it as a mental model when I catch myself, again, being self-aware. It's like, okay, I'm talking too much. I'm spending more than 10% of my time telling them my opinions and my thoughts. I need to take a step back now and figure out why am I doing this and how can I listen better and how can I ask probing questions. And probing questions are some of the most powerful ways of actually developing individuals by causing them to think harder.
Very cool. Very cool.
Patrick, what do you think you excel at? Building a security program from the ground up, taking one that's not quite there and pushing it over the top. I mean, where do you stay?
I've kind of done that. I mean, if I reflect back, if I look at McKesson and Kaiser Permanente, I basically built from the ground up. At Salesforce, I matured one, and at Dropbox, it's really that maturing element as well, but with a heavy business focus. Where do I excel at? I don't know. I probably am at the stage where I don't necessarily want to build from scratch anymore. That's something different. It's a different ambition. I'm lucky to have just an amazing world-class team here at Dropbox, and we've maintained the quality extraordinarily high. So that maturing process has been, I would say, a very pleasant one. That's kind of a way of putting it. So I would say that from
you come in.
So I would say on that leadership journey from a development focused perspective, I think where I'm at now is like I actually spend much more time. I've gotten comfort with the technical leadership we have here and with the expert that I have, and I actually spend much more time what I consider to be security strategic things for the company, which is if I look at the success of Dropbox in the long run, a lot of it is going to be based on how do we continue to grow and build the trust that customers have in us, get them to buy our product because, hey, Dropbox is trusted. So it's that element of in my career now where I think a lot of the security program that's internally facing is in really good hands, and I'm doing much more strategic work to figure out how we really have security supporting the growth of the business.
Very cool.
So you're more customer or client focused and trying to build that trust with your customers.
Absolutely, and that includes listening to them, advocating for features and investments that we're making in the platform, so influencing the product development side of things. They're looking at strategies such as what companies are there in our security strategy. Are there companies that we should be evaluating to buy, for example, from M&A perspective to increase our portfolio of capabilities? So there are a lot of things that I've been able to say that I really trust the team that's actually running the execution on a day-to-day basis, and that's freed me up to do some really awesome strategic work for the company.
Cool. Do you ever go in, when you're talking to some company that wants to move in, is there different approaches that you have to take? Do you ever walk in and they go, I really don't want to be on this, but I'm being forced to by regulatory requirement? Do you ever have to worry about the different dynamics that and handle those tacks in a specific tack?
It's really interesting because when you look at especially larger companies that are in regulated spaces and globally, the amount of variability that you have is just absolutely amazing. And
sure.
So it's like, and you know what? My company has to be compliant with the Zimbabwean Financial Controls Act of 2017. And it's like, you know what? Sorry, it's like we have to sometimes pull it back and basically go, it's like, look, we're a cloud provider. Here's what we do. We're going to be transparent around what we do. We're going to have a roadmap for increasing our security and compliance capabilities and whatnot over time. But at the end of the day, we can't be everything to everyone. And say there is a roadmap we're executing against. We're going to invest, frankly, what makes the most sense from a risk perspective for the largest number of our customers here. But we're not going to be in a position that we couldn't stay in business if we were to customize what Dropbox is and the controls we have for every every iteration or every combination of security and compliance requirements that customers may have. So those conversations tend to be very honest conversations. It's like, look, I'm going to talk to you about what we actually do, the controls that we have, the certifications, on in depth, basically, what our security stack looks like. And I'm going to listen to you as a customer, and I'm trying to understand what are the incremental requirements that you may have. But I'm not going to promise to you that we're going to pivot on that immediately. We're going to take that in, and we're going to look at what are we hearing from the market, from the customers, what are we seeing in the threat environment that we need to invest in to defend our customers, et cetera. And then we basically need to make risk-driven business decisions for Dropbox, where we put our resources.
Very cool.
And sometimes those decisions are who do you hire? I mean, what do you look for in a new hire when you have to add someone to your staff? How do you find the right person?
It's a secret. We are an extraordinarily, we're very, very focused on recruiting the right people. I'd say that we have a very low drama. It's a horrible thing to say, but when you focus on getting really great that have the ability to get access to them and really focus on it's an amazingly I don't know if I'm rambling here. You guys still there?
Yeah, you were cutting out there a little bit, but I think we got
yeah, I couldn't hear any of that, sorry. Did you catch it, Brian?
I caught a little bit of it. Maybe you could go over that just a little bit again.
I was saying that I think when we think about staffing and recruiting, we're in a bit of a privileged position. We put a lot of focus on recruiting the right talent. We have a very intensive screening process for candidates. And just because we're a high-profile company, we have access to a huge amount of talent on a global scale. So it puts us in a very privileged position in terms of recruiting, probably much better than many other companies that are out there. And that was kind of one of the points I was making earlier around advantages that cloud companies have. Large cloud companies really can attract some just absolutely amazing talent.
Okay.
But if you didn't have that huge presence, I mean, what would you look for in recruits?
I would look for people that are self-motivated by security. I mean, the people that I found that are awesome aren't necessarily the ones who went and studied security and have a bunch of certifications and letters after their names. The really amazing ones are the ones that are just fascinated by security. They invest a huge amount of personal time. If you ask them, tell me what your lab looks like at home, their eyes light up and they tell you about all the investments they've made themselves. There has to be this core passion and interest and depth and really the appreciation for how complicated all of this is. Conversely, the other folks are like, yeah, security is a hot career, so I studied it and I have a CISSP, and it's like, yeah, that's not that interesting.
Yeah. No. When I was when I'm looking for people, I always like enthusiasm. I like to know what they're doing outside of the job, not just what they're doing to get paid. That's always an important thing for me. So, Mr. Betcher, do you have any other questions?
No, I mean, CSI Cyber is going to come on pretty soon, so I think I might.
Really? So yeah, Mr. Betcher actually took my last question. I was going to ask you, what do you look for when you're hiring somebody? So that was pretty awesome. We're of the same mind here. So Patrick, you must be available for speaking engagements and what have you. If people wanted to get a hold of you or get in contact with you for things of that nature, how would they go about doing so?
Send an email to noreply@dropbox.com. Just kidding.
You got me
no,
there.
seriously, my email address is not a secret. It's patrickhim@dropbox.com. I absolutely, would love to hear from folks. This is, I guess I'm at the stage of my career where I really enjoy mentoring and speaking and sharing ideas, and especially I think to the theme that we discussed about, which is really cloud is such a powerful risk management strategy for most organizations. It's like a missionary thing for me to spread the good news.
Very cool. Yeah. And are you on Twitter or anything like that where people could get a hold of you that way too?
I'm a remarkably private person, so I have a Twitter account just so nobody else can sit on it, and I
Ah,
generally do social networking, and but that's a whole nother discussion around my personal philosophies around privacy.
right on, right on. All right. Well, I mean that that was great, Patrick. I appreciate you coming out. I appreciate the first time we've ever had to deal with somebody not directly on an interview. That was not painful. That was great because most of our people we work through directly and not through like a handler or something. So that was awesome. So.
Well, I'm glad I wasn't a cause of pain for you guys. This was a lot of fun. Thank you for the invitation.
So you can find the BreakSec podcast official Twitter at BreakSec, BrakesEC. You can find my Twitter account at Brian Brake, BryanBrake. Mr. Betcher, you can find him at BetcherPwned, BoettCherPwned. We have a Patreon. You can join us over there on patreon.com/BDS_podcast. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please feel free to hit us up at bds.podcast@gmail.com. If you don't have a regular method of listening to our podcast, we're on the Stitcher Network. We're also found on the TuneIn Radio app. You can search for us on both of those sites, or you can just look in the show notes for a link that will take you directly to those. We're also in the Google Play Store. You have to be logged in to access that, but there's a link in the show notes to that show as well. We're also on iTunes. If you're our user of iTunes, please feel free to hit us up with feedback on that. We appreciate that. So that was it for breaking down security this week. Everyone have a great week, and we will talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.